The hand connected with the raw, ringing finality of a closing vault door. The sound was swallowed by the manufactured cheer of the party, 100 conversations about portfolios and acquisitions absorbing the small, private violence without a ripple. Ilara Vance did not scream. She had not screamed in years. Her screams had become a currency Marcus Thorne had long since devalued through overuse. Instead, the impact sent a tremor through her, a deep, seismic shudder that began in her jaw and ended in the cold marble floor beneath the thin soles of her borrowed shoes. Her head snapped to the side, her carefully pinned hair, a style meant to project a serenity she hadn't felt since she'd met him, coming undone in a soft cascade over her shoulder. The room, a penthouse that scraped the belly of the clouds, swam for a moment in a blur of glittering lights and indistinct faces. What happens next will change everything. Marcus's fingers, still tingling from the blow, immediately wrapped around her upper arm, a gesture that from a distance might look proprietary, even affectionate. Up close, it was the grip of a jailer. "Smile," he hissed, his breath a foul mix of expensive scotch and something rotten from deep within him. "Our guests are watching. This is our night." It was his night. It was his penthouse, his guests, his victory. She was merely the centerpiece, the most valuable asset he was about to legally acquire, the architect of the very fortune he was celebrating. He had taken her designs, her brilliance, her soul, and slapped his own mediocre name on them. Now he was taking the rest. The marriage license sat on a small, ornate table near the grand piano, a stark, white rectangle of surrender, weighted down by a crystal paperweight and a gold-plated pen. Her signature was the final rivet in the cage he had been building around her for 3 years. Ilara's gaze drifted past his shoulder, past the laughing, oblivious crowd. She saw their reflections in the floor-to-ceiling windows, ghosts dancing over the sprawling, indifferent city below. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine simply walking towards that window and not stopping. The thought was not one of despair, but of cold, quiet calculation. A final, decisive act of architectural redesign. An escape hatch. Her body was a prison, but its design had flaws. She did not want to die. She wanted to live, but the version of life Marcus offered was a slow, suffocating burial. He had not updated the file on her. He was working from a version of her that had never been truly accurate, a version that he believed was fragile, compliant, and broken. He saw the quiet endurance and mistook it for weakness. He saw the grace and mistook it for surrender. It was a fatal miscalculation, but the consequences had been entirely her own. Until now. Her eyes landed on a man seated alone at a table in the far corner, almost lost in the deep shadows cast by a large, abstract sculpture. He had been there all evening, a point of stillness in the swirling chaos. He was not drinking, not speaking, not networking. He was simply watching. His suit was a dark charcoal gray, tailored with a precision that made every other man in the room look like he was wearing a rental. It was the kind of suit that didn't announce its cost, but its power. His posture was relaxed, yet utterly composed. There was no wasted motion in him. While Marcus performed confidence, this man simply possessed it. It was in the air around him, a tangible, gravitational force. Their eyes met across the glittering expanse. His were dark, intelligent, and held an unnerving depth. He did not look away, did not offer a polite social smile. He simply held her gaze, and in that moment, Ilara felt a strange, terrifying sensation. She felt seen. Not as Marcus's beautiful, tragic fiancée, not as a social accessory, but as a woman with a handprint blooming on her cheek, a woman standing on the precipice of an abyss. The look was not one of pity. It was one of recognition. Marcus, oblivious, gave her arm a vicious squeeze. "Did you hear me?" I said, "Smile. We're about to sign the papers. I'm going to make my speech." "Let go of my arm, Marcus," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of the tremor she felt in her bones. It was the voice she used to command contractors on a job site, precise and direct. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Don't be dramatic. It's your big night." He started to pull her towards the small table, towards the pen and the paper, towards the end. The man in the corner placed his water glass down on its coaster. The sound was imperceptible to anyone else in the room, but in the sudden, sharp focus of Alara's terror, it was as loud as a gavel strike. He rose. He did not rush. He was not performing. He simply stood, and with that single, fluid motion, the entire axis of the room tilted. Conversations did not so much stop as they faltered, the energy draining out of them. The music seemed to thin, the jaunty jazz tune suddenly sounding tinny and foolish. Heads turned, not with a sudden jerk, but with a slow, magnetic pull. The most powerful people in the city, bankers, developers, politicians, all looked towards the corner, their expressions shifting from manufactured bonhomie to something else. Respect, deference, fear. Marcus felt the shift. He stopped pulling Alara, his head whipping around to see what had stolen his spotlight. He saw the man walking towards them, his steps unhurried and silent on the thick rug. "Who the hell is that?" Marcus muttered, his arrogance curdling into confusion. "Security, get him out of here." But the hired security guards, large men in ill-fitting suits, were frozen, their eyes wide. They recognized him. Everyone did. Everyone but Marcus, who had clawed his way into this world but had never truly understood its structure, its hidden columns and load-bearing walls. The man stopped a few feet away from them. His name was Jin Woo Kwon. To the public, he was the enigmatic CEO of Sun Sin Holdings, a global conglomerate with interests in everything from technology to construction. To the people in this room, the ones who truly understood the flow of power, he was something more. He was the head of the Sun Sin Syndicate, a quiet sovereign whose influence was as deep and silent as the ocean. He looked at Marcus, but his eyes conveyed that he wasn't truly seeing him. He was looking at an obstacle, an error in a blueprint. Then his gaze shifted to Alara, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the effortless authority of a surgeon's scalpel. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. He spoke in Korean, a single fluid sentence, a language Alara had studied in college, a passion she'd abandoned when Marcus had deemed it a waste of time. "Is this man bothering you?" The question was so simple, so direct, it bypassed all her defenses. A single hot tear escaped and tracked a clean path through the faint dusting of powder on her cheek. She gave a barely perceptible nod. Mr. Kwon's attention returned to Marcus. He switched to flawless, unaccented English. "Let go of her arm." It was not a request. It was a statement of an event that was about to happen. Marcus, emboldened by ignorance, puffed out his chest. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private party. This is my fiancé." Mr. Kwon's expression did not change. It was a mask of serene control. "You have made 2 mistakes," he said, his voice dropping half an octave, becoming something that felt less like sound and more like a physical pressure in the air. "The first was touching her. The second was speaking to me." He made a small, almost invisible gesture with his hand. 2 men, who Alara hadn't even noticed, detached themselves from the walls. They were dressed like him, in dark, perfectly tailored suits. They moved with a liquid efficiency, without wasted motion. One stood behind Marcus, the other to his side. "Get your hands off me," Marcus blustered, trying to shake them off as they each took an arm. It was like trying to shrug off granite. "Marcus Thorne," Mr. Kwon said, his voice a calm recitation of fact. "Your project, the Elysian Tower, is being financed by a subsidiary of my company. Your investors are my investors. The bank that holds the note on this penthouse is my bank. You are a guest in my house, and you are upsetting my architect." The word hung in the air. Architect. Not fiancé, not muse. Architect. Marcus's face went slack, the color draining from it. The swagger, the performative power, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man, panicked and small. He finally understood. He had not just picked a fight. He had declared war on a god. "Take him downstairs," Mr. Kwan said to his men. "Ms. Choi will handle the logistics." Marcus started to babble, a pathetic stream of apologies and excuses. It was not because he was sorry, but because he was caught. The men propelled him towards the elevator, his expensive shoes stumbling on the plush carpet. The heavy brass doors slid shut, cutting off his pleas. The room was utterly silent, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. 100 powerful people held their breath, waiting to see what the quiet sovereign would do next. Mr. Kwan's focus was entirely on Alara. He took a step closer, his eyes scanning her face, lingering for a fraction of a second on the red mark on her cheek. His expression remained unreadable, but she saw a flicker of something in the depths of his gaze, something cold and precise. It was the look of a man identifying a problem that needed to be solved, permanently. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice now gentle, the iron wrapped in even more silk, "would you allow me to escort you somewhere safe?" She looked at the marriage license, still sitting on the table. The gold pin gleamed under the recessed lighting. For 3 years, she had been a ghost in her own life, a silent partner to her own destruction. She had endured. She had survived. But she had forgotten how to live. She looked back at the man in front of her. He was offering her an exit. Not an escape hatch into nothingness, but a door to somewhere else. "Yes," she whispered, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "Yes, I would." He offered his arm. It was not a gesture of ownership, but of support, a steady, solid anchor in the wreckage of her life. As she took it, she felt the fine, smooth texture of his suit, a world away from the coarse desperation of Marcus's grip. He led her away from the gawking crowd, away from the symbolic table of her surrender, and towards the private elevator on the other side of the room. The guests parted before them like water before the bow of a ship. As the elevator doors closed, sealing them in a small, quiet space of brushed steel and soft light, Ilara finally allowed herself to exhale. It was a ragged, shuddering breath that carried with it the weight of 1,000 silent screams. The great, unyielding tension that had been her constant companion for years began to recede, leaving behind a profound, disorienting exhaustion. She swayed on her feet, the adrenaline deserting her all at once. Mr. Kwan's hand was instantly there, a firm, steadying presence on her back. He did not pull her closer or make any move that felt intimate. It was a gesture of pure, practical support, like a well-placed structural beam. "It's all right," he said, his low voice absorbing the resonant hum of the elevator. "You are safe." The words were simple, yet they landed with the force of a revelation. Safety had become a foreign country to her, a place she remembered from faded photographs but could no longer imagine visiting. She leaned her head back against the cool steel wall, closing her eyes. The silence in the elevator was a balm. It was not the tense, waiting silence of a home she shared with Marcus, but a deep, structural silence, the kind found in the heart of a well-built building. The elevator opened not into a lobby, but into a private subterranean garage. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and expensive cars. A sleek black sedan, so polished it looked like a moving pool of oil, was waiting, its engine humming a low, powerful thrum. A woman stood beside the open rear door. She was sharp and elegant in a dark pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun. She held a tablet in one hand, and her eyes, though assessing, were not unkind. This had to be Ms. Choi. "Everything is prepared, sir," she said, her voice crisp and professional. Mr. Kwan nodded, guiding Alara toward the car. "Miss Vance, this is my assistant, Ms. Choi. She is the most efficient person I know." Ms. Choi gave a slight, respectful bow of her head towards Alara. "It is an honor, Miss Vance. I am a great admirer of your work." Alara blinked, confused. "My work?" "Your thesis on biomimetic architecture and structural sustainability." Ms. Choi clarified, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It was required reading for our acquisitions team when we began expanding into avant-garde real estate. The information was so unexpected it almost made Ilara dizzy. Someone knew. Someone had read her words, her ideas, the work she had poured her soul into before Marcus had systematically convinced her it was worthless, amateurish, something only he could refine into profitability. Mr. Kwan helped her into the plush leather interior of the car before sliding in beside her. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, encasing them in an even deeper silence. Ms. Choi took the passenger seat, and the car pulled away smoothly, gliding through the empty garage and up a ramp into the rain-slicked city streets. They drove for some time without speaking. Ilara watched the neon-smeared cityscape slide past the tinted windows. The world outside looked chaotic and fragile, but inside the car there was an atmosphere of absolute calm and control. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To one of my properties," Mr. Kwan answered, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "A place you can rest. There is a full staff, and security is absolute. No one will find you. No one will bother you." "Why?" she asked, the question hanging between them. "Why are you doing this?" He turned his head to look at her then. The faint light from the passing street lamps played over the sharp, intelligent planes of his face. "Because," he began, choosing his words with care, Sun Sin Holdings was preparing to invest over $900 million into the Elysian Tower project, based on a set of architectural designs. Those designs were bold, innovative, and brilliant. They were also distinctly not the work of a man like Marcus Thorne. He paused, letting the statement settle. His work is derivative. He builds boxes, profitable ones, but they are boxes nonetheless. The designs for the Elysian were different. They had a voice, a signature. I tasked my team with finding the origin of that signature. It led us to a university thesis, published 5 years ago. It led us to you. Ilara felt a cold dread mix with a flicker of vindication. "You knew." "I suspected," he corrected gently. "I knew Mr. Thorne was a fraud. I did not know the extent of his methods. I attended the party tonight to observe him, to observe you, to confirm my suspicions before dissolving our partnership." His eyes darkened slightly. He accelerated the timeline. The car turned off the main thoroughfare and passed through a high, unmarked gate that slid open silently to admit them. They drove down a long, tree-lined driveway towards a house that was less a house and more a masterpiece of modernist architecture. It was all clean lines, glass walls, and warm wood, nestled into the hillside as if it had grown there. It was a house she would have designed herself. "The project will still be built, Miss Vance," Mr. Kwan continued as the car came to a stop under a cantilevered portico. "The city needs it, my company needs it, but it will be built correctly, with the proper attribution." He turned to her fully, his expression serious. "I would like to offer you a position as the lead architect on the project, your project. You will have an unlimited budget, a full team of your choosing, and complete creative control. Your name, and your name alone, will be on the final building." The offer was staggering, a dream she had long ago packed away and buried. It was everything she had ever wanted. It was also terrifying. She had just escaped one form of ownership. She was wary of entering another, no matter how gilded the cage. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Mr. Kwan," she said, finding a sliver of her old strength. It was a quote from her own thesis, the introduction, a statement of her core philosophy. A slow, small smile touched his lips for the first time. It transformed his face, softening the severe lines and revealing a surprising warmth. "I know," he said. "That is why I am making you the offer." Ms. Choi opened the door for her. The air outside was clean and cool, smelling of rain and damp earth. An older woman with kind eyes and a cascade of silver hair pinned in an elegant twist was waiting for them at the door. She bowed her head to Mr. Kwan, then turned her warm, knowing gaze on Ilara. My mother, Mrs. Kwan, he introduced. She oversees this residence. The old woman stepped forward and took Alara's hands in her own. Her hands were surprisingly strong and warm. She looked at the fading mark on Alara's cheek, and her expression was one of fierce maternal anger. She spoke in gentle Korean. The storm is over, little bird. You are safe in this nest now. Rest. That night, Alara slept in a bed larger than her entire bedroom in the apartment she'd shared with Marcus. The sheets were impossibly soft, the room was silent, and for the first time in 3 years, she did not dream of falling. The next few weeks passed in a surreal haze of quiet productivity and healing. Alara found herself in a state of recalibration, her entire world having shifted on its axis. The house was a sanctuary, a place of profound peace. It was not opulent in the way Marcus's penthouse had been, all flash and no substance. This place had soul. It was filled with books, art, and the quiet, calming presence of Mrs. Kwan, who moved through the halls with a serene grace. She never pried, but she always seemed to appear with a cup of ginseng tea or a warm blanket at the exact moment Alara needed it most. Mr. Kwan, Jinwoo, as his mother insisted Alara call him, gave her space. He did not crowd her or press her for a decision on his offer. Instead, he had a full studio set up for her in a glass-walled wing of the house that overlooked a tranquil Zen garden. It was equipped with the best technology, drafting tables, and a library of architectural texts that made her heart ache with joy. He had, in essence, given her back her own mind. She began to work. At first, it was hesitant. Her creative instincts, so long suppressed and ridiculed by Marcus, were shy to emerge. She would sketch an idea, then immediately hear his voice in her head, calling it impractical, sentimental, unmarketable. But in the quiet of the studio, with the gentle sound of the fountain outside, his voice began to fade. It was replaced by her own. She spent hours with her original designs for the Elysian Tower, now tentatively renamed the Phoenix Tower. She saw the flaws, the compromises she had made to appease Marcus's crass commercialism. With a ruthless, liberating precision, she began to tear them down to their foundations and rebuild. She worked with a feverish intensity, often late into the night, fueled by tea and the sheer, intoxicating freedom of her own talent. Jinwoo would sometimes appear in the doorway of the studio late at night. He would not speak, not wanting to break her concentration. He would simply stand there for a few moments, watching her work, a quiet, unreadable expression on his face. One night, he left a tray with a small bowl of noodles and a flask of warm sake on a table just inside the door and left as silently as he came. The gesture was so simple, so thoughtful, it touched her more than any grand romantic act ever could. This was not a man who performed care. He simply provided it. Their interactions were a slow burn, a gradual building of trust and respect. They would often have breakfast together on the terrace with his mother. The conversations were never about Marcus or the past. They spoke of architecture, of art, of philosophy. She discovered he had a deep appreciation for balance and form, not just in buildings, but in life. He saw the world as a series of interconnected structures, and he had a profound, quiet desire to see those structures be just and strong. She, in turn, challenged his controlled world. She would argue with him about a design element, her passion for her work overriding any lingering intimidation. He never took offense. He would listen, his head tilted, his dark eyes considering her point of view. He seemed to enjoy her fire, the strength she was slowly reclaiming. "You believe a building should breathe?" he observed one evening, looking over a new rendering she had created. "It has to," she countered, pointing to the integrated atriums and the passive ventilation systems. "It's a living space. It needs lungs." Marcus wanted to seal it up, turn it into a monument to himself, a tomb. Buildings, like people, get sick if they can't breathe. He looked from the rendering to her face, and she saw a deep, startling recognition in his eyes. He understood the metaphor. He understood her. Meanwhile, behind this tranquil curtain of her new life, Jin Woo was systematically dismantling Marcus Thorne's world. The actions were precise, discreet, and devastatingly effective. Ms. Choi would provide quiet updates during their brief, formal meetings. Thorne's primary lender has called in his loans, citing a violation of the morality clause in his contract. The video from the penthouse security cameras was quite persuasive, she reported one afternoon, her tone utterly neutral. A week later, we have acquired a controlling interest in the steel company contracted for the Elysian project. They will, of course, be honoring their contract, but with the new lead architect. And then, Mr. Thorne has been attempting to liquidate his remaining assets. I have taken the liberty of purchasing his debts from his various creditors at a significant discount. He is now, for all intents and purposes, solvent only by my client's grace. Ilara listened to these reports with a complex mix of emotions. There was a cold, cathartic satisfaction in seeing him face consequences, but there was also a deep unease at the sheer, effortless scale of Jin Woo's power. He could unmake a man with a few phone calls. It was a sobering reminder of the world she had stumbled into. "Is this necessary?" she asked him one day, looking out at the peaceful garden. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. He was standing beside her, but he kept a respectful distance. "A diseased limb must be removed before the infection can spread. He hurt you. More than that, he stole from you. He devalued your work, and in doing so, he devalued the very concept of integrity. That is an offense I cannot tolerate. In my business, as in yours, structure is everything. He is a faulty beam, a crack in the foundation. He must be removed." His words were cold, but his reasoning was not. It was about order, about justice, about protecting the integrity of the structure. And she realized with a sudden jolt that he considered her an essential part of that structure. Marcus, for his part, was living in a state of deluded denial. His world had crumbled around him, but his arrogance was a load-bearing wall. He had lost the penthouse, his credit cards were declined, and former business partners now crossed the street to avoid him. Yet, he was convinced this was all a temporary setback, a power play by a jealous rival. "Give her 3 days. She'll be begging to come back," he'd snarled to the one sycophantic lawyer who hadn't deserted him yet. "She has nothing without me. She's a broke, sentimental artist. Kwan will get bored of her and toss her out, and then she'll see. She'll come crawling back." He was working from an old file. He had no concept of the woman Ilara was becoming, or perhaps the woman she had always been, now finally free to emerge. He saw her as a possession that had been stolen, and he was determined to get his property back. His fatal miscalculation came when he learned of the Obsidian Gala. It was the premier architectural and development event of the year. Sun Sin Holdings was the primary sponsor, and it was widely rumored that Mr. Kwan would be using the occasion to unveil the full plans and lead architect for his new flagship project, the skyscraper that would redefine the city's skyline. In his unraveling mind, Marcus saw this as his stage. He would confront them publicly. He would shame Ilara, paint her as a treacherous, ungrateful lover who had run off with a richer man. He would claim the designs as his own, waving around the preliminary partnership agreements he had forced her to sign. He believed the court of public opinion, swayed by his performance of the wronged man, would force Kwan's hand. He managed to secure a ticket through a desperate, leveraged call to a former contact. He was a mouse, willfully walking into the lion's den, believing it was his cage to rattle. The trap, which he couldn't see, was that the entire den had been constructed specifically for him. The Obsidian Gala was held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel, a cavernous space of soaring ceilings, gilded columns, and glittering chandeliers. The air hummed with the quiet, confident buzz of real power. The most influential figures in global real estate and finance were all there, their bespoke suits and designer gowns a uniform of the elite. Ilara stood slightly to the side of the main stage, a world away from the terrified woman in the borrowed dress she had been only a few months ago. Tonight, she wore a gown of deep emerald silk, A color Jinwoo had quietly mentioned reminded him of the forests in his homeland. It was a dress that was both architecturally precise and fluid, a design of her own that she had sketched one evening and Mrs. Kwan had insisted on having made for her. Her hair was styled elegantly, and her face, now free of the constant strain of fear, had a luminous calm. She was not hiding, she was present. Jinwoo stood near her, not possessively, but as a silent, supportive presence. He was in a perfectly cut black tuxedo, a stark figure of stillness against the room's opulence. He had barely spoken to her all evening, but he didn't need to. Their communication had evolved beyond words into a shared space of mutual understanding. He had given her back her name, and she, in turn, had given his monolithic project a soul. The moment arrived. The president of the Architectural Guild went to the podium to announce the evening's keynote address. And now it is my distinct honor to welcome the man whose vision is reshaping not just our skyline, but the future of sustainable development itself, Mr. Jinwoo Kwan. Polite, respectful applause filled the room as Jinwoo made his way to the stage. He moved with his usual unhurried grace, a figure of absolute authority. He reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and his calm, low voice filled the vast hall. "Thank you," he began. "Tonight, we are not here to celebrate a building of steel and glass. We are here to celebrate an idea. The idea that a structure can be more than a space, that it can be a part of the city's ecosystem, that it can breathe." He spoke for several minutes, outlining the philosophy behind the Phoenix Tower. He never raised his voice, yet every person in the room was held captive. And then he turned slightly, gesturing towards the wings. "But this vision is not mine alone. It is the work of a singular, brilliant talent, an architect whose voice was silenced for too long. It is my honor to introduce the true architect of the Phoenix Tower." It was then that Marcus made his move. "That woman is a fraud!" The shout came from the back of the ballroom. A ripple of confusion and shock went through the crowd as they turned to see Marcus Thorne, his face blotchy and red, his suit rumpled, shoving his way through the stunned guests. He looked wild, unhinged, a man running on pure, rancid arrogance. "Those designs are mine! She stole them from me!" he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Alara. "She is my fiancée! We have a contract, an obligation!" Two of Jinwoo's security men started to move towards him, but Jinwoo held up a single, calm hand, stopping them. He watched Marcus's chaotic approach without a flicker of emotion. It was the look of a chess master watching his opponent make the final, fatal move he had anticipated from the beginning. Alara felt a cold spike of her old fear, a phantom echo of his grip on her arm. But then she looked at Jinwoo, at his absolute, unshakable calm, and the fear subsided. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She would not be that woman ever again. Marcus reached the foot of the stage, his eyes blazing with a desperate, pathetic fury. "Tell them, Alara! Tell them you owe me everything!" Jinwoo leaned into the microphone, his voice as cool and placid as a deep lake. "Mr. Thorne," he said, the polite address somehow more insulting than any curse. "Thank you for joining us. Your timing is impeccable. We were just moving to the business portion of the evening." He tapped a tablet that was resting on the podium. The massive screen behind him, which had been showing an artistic rendering of the tower, flickered and changed. It now displayed a series of legal documents, magnified for the entire room to see. "As many of you know," Jinwoo continued, his tone conversational, as if explaining a minor point of interest, "Sunsin Holdings has a reputation for meticulous due diligence. In the process of evaluating the Phoenix Tower project, we undertook a comprehensive financial review of all associated entities. This included Thorne Development." The screen changed again, showing a flowchart of debts and acquisitions. A spiderweb of red arrows all pointed from Marcus Thorne's name to the Sunsin Holdings logo. "As of 4:15 p.m. this afternoon," Jinwoo stated, his voice devoid of triumph, a simple recitation of fact, A subsidiary of my company completed the acquisition of the last of Mr. Thorne's outstanding commercial and personal debt. This includes the loans on his properties, his business credit lines, and even the financing for the car he drove here tonight." A wave of stunned murmurs swept through the ballroom. Marcus's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. The foundation of his reality was cracking beneath his feet. "Furthermore," Jinwoo went on, relentless, "the intellectual property clause in the financing agreements he signed was quite specific. Any designs produced while under the debt obligation to the lender become collateral. As the new debt holder, Sunsin now legally controls the preliminary sketches you are so desperate to claim, Mr. Thorne. Though, of course, we have no use for them. We prefer the work of the original architect." He gestured to Alara. "Miss Vance's contract with my company is ironclad, and as for the personal obligation you mentioned—" Jinwoo paused, his dark eyes finally locking onto Marcus's. And for the first time, Alara saw not just coldness, but a deep, controlled contempt. "You are a man who understands assets and liabilities, so let me put this in terms you can comprehend. You have become a liability. To your investors, to your partners, to the industry. My company does not invest in liabilities. We acquire them, and then we write them off." The finality of those words struck Marcus like a physical blow. The last ounce of fight drained out of him. The bravado, the anger, the arrogance, it all collapsed inward, leaving a void. His world had not just been conquered, it had been erased. He was a rounding error in a financial report. He dropped to his knees. The sound of his body hitting the polished floor was shockingly loud in the silent room. A choked, guttural sob escaped his lips, and then another. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as the full, absolute totality of his ruin washed over him. He was not just broke. He was nothing. A ghost. The security men moved in then, their movements still quiet and efficient. They lifted the weeping, broken man to his feet and escorted him out through a side door. No one watched him go. The entire room, a universe of power and influence, was looking at the man on the stage. Jinwoo watched until the door closed, his expression impassive. Then he turned back to the audience, his composure absolute. He had not raised his voice. He had not made a threat. He had simply read the ledger. He stepped away from the podium and walked over to Alara, extending his hand to her. "Now," he said, his voice once again filling the silent hall, the microphone picking up his words. "As I was saying, I would like to introduce the woman whose integrity and vision are the true foundation of this project, the lead architect of the Phoenix Tower, Miss Alara Vance." He led her to the center of the stage. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a single person began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, the applause a thunderous, rolling wave of validation. It washed over Ilara, a sound she had never expected to hear. It was for her work, for her survival. She looked out at the sea of faces, and then she looked at Jinwoo. He was looking at her, and in his eyes she saw no pride of ownership, no gloating victory. She saw what she had seen that first night, across a crowded room full of lies. Recognition, deep, quiet, and absolute. And for the first time in a very long time, Alara Vance smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes and filled them with light. Later that night, they stood on the private balcony of his suite at the hotel. The city spread out below them, a glittering tapestry of light and shadow. The sounds of the gala had faded, leaving only the distant, rhythmic hum of the metropolis. The cool night air felt clean against Alara's skin. She had taken off her shoes, and the cold stone of the balcony felt solid and real beneath her feet. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was no longer just comfortable. It was profound. It was a shared space they had built together, a structure made of unspoken truths and mutual respect. She was no longer a project to be saved, and he was no longer a rescuer. They were simply two people standing in the quiet aftermath of a necessary storm. She finally turned to him, her emerald dress rustling softly. "Thank you," she said. The words felt small, inadequate for the sheer scale of what he had done. He was leaning against the railing, his tuxedo jacket off, his tie loosened. He looked less like a sovereign and more like a man at peace. "For what?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "I merely corrected an error in the ledger. Justice is a form of balance. The accounts were unbalanced. Now they are not." "It was more than that," she insisted quietly. "You gave me back my name." "No," he countered, turning to face her fully. The city lights cast his face in sharp relief. "Your name was always your own. You simply needed a place where you were free to use it, a foundation strong enough to build upon." She thought about the years with Marcus, the slow, systematic erosion of her confidence, the theft of her work, the isolation. He had tried to turn her into a ghost, an anonymous force that fueled his own ambition. She had nearly let him. But that ghost was gone now, exorcised by the public collapse of the man who had created it. A slow, deep exhale left her body. It felt as though she was breathing out the last toxic remnants of her past. The weight that had settled in her bones for years, the constant grinding exhaustion of enduring, was finally, truly gone. In its place was a quiet, steady sense of peace, a feeling of being correctly placed in the world. "What will you do now?" Jinwoo asked. It was not an interrogation, but a question of genuine curiosity. She looked out at the skyline, at the countless buildings piercing the night. For years, she had looked at them from a prisoner's window. Now, she saw them as a peer. She saw the gaps, the possibilities, the future. "I'm going to build," she said, her voice filled with a conviction she hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to build the Phoenix Tower so that it stands for a century. And then, I'm going to build something else. Something for me." He nodded slowly, a small, approving smile on his lips. "I have no doubt you will." He took a small step closer, and the space between them became charged with a different kind of energy. It was not the fiery, unstable passion she had once mistaken for love with Marcus. This was something else. It was calm, steady, and incredibly powerful. It was the quiet, gravitational pull of two celestial bodies finally finding their proper orbit around one another. "Ilara," he said, her first name sounding both formal and intimate in his voice. "My mother is fond of you. She says you have the spirit of a warrior and the eyes of an artist. She is rarely wrong." "She has been very kind to me," Ilara replied, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. "She believes kindness is a prerequisite for strength," he said, "a lesson I am still learning." He looked at her, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I don't leave because things become complicated. That is what you said." "My life is often complicated." "So is mine," she answered, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I don't build on faulty foundations, Jinwoo. And I don't run from complexity. I redesign it." His smile widened, reaching his eyes. He reached out, not to touch her face or take her arm, but to gently brush a stray strand of hair from her shoulder. The touch was light, respectful, and yet it sent a current of warmth through her entire body. It was a touch that asked for nothing but offered a world of safety. The story did not end there, with a kiss on a balcony overlooking the city. That would have been too simple, a scene from a movie, not from a life. Theirs was not a story of sudden passion, but of slow, deliberate construction. Months later, the Phoenix Tower was rising from the ground, a skeleton of steel and concrete that already held the promise of the grace to come. Ilara was on site every day, her name respected. Her commands followed without question. She was in her element, a master of her craft, finally free to create without compromise. Jinwoo was a constant, quiet presence in her life. He would visit the site, not to inspect, but to watch her. He would bring her coffee, listen to her talk for an hour about the tensile strength of a new composite material, and his focus would never waver. He learned the language of her world, just as she was learning the language of his. Their new beginning came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. They had driven out of the city to his mother's home, the true family seat, a traditional Korean house built around a serene central courtyard. Mrs. Kwan was teaching Alara the art of preparing a proper tea ceremony. The air was filled with the scent of cedarwood and green tea. Jinwoo sat with them, forgoing his usual suit for simple, comfortable clothes. He looked younger, the immense weight of his empire lifted for a few hours. They were not a CEO and his star architect. They were not a protector and a survivor. They were just a man and a woman sharing a quiet moment of peace with his mother. As Alara carefully poured the hot water into the small, delicate cups, Mrs. Kwan looked from her to her son, a knowing, satisfied smile on her face. "A home is not just wood and stone," the old woman said in her gentle Korean, her words a quiet piece of wisdom. "It is built from honesty. It is built from complication. It is built from the daily choice to stay, even when the storms come. You two, you know how to build." Ilara placed a cup of tea before Jin-woo. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but it held the weight of everything that had passed between them and the promise of everything to come. He looked at her, his dark eyes full of a quiet, steady emotion she was finally beginning to understand. It was not ownership. It was partnership. It was not passion. It was peace. Looking at him, in the quiet sanctuary he and his mother had created, Ilara knew she was home. It was a structure she had not designed, but one she would spend the rest of her life reinforcing, expanding, and filling with light. Her future was not a blueprint to be followed, but a skyline waiting to be imagined. And for the first time, she was not afraid to build. She was ready. What came next was not a happily ever after. It was something far more real and far more beautiful. It was the work of living,